Hi guys, Maggie from Knitting in the Park. Murphy too. So we just worked together on learning how to cast on stitches using the simple knitted cast on method. Now in this video, we're going to take that knit skill that we learned to cast on and use it to actually start our project. So in this case, I'm just using some bit of spare yarn, some needles, and creating a small swatch or sample knitting. So you can knit along with me here, whether you are learning and want to practice before you start your project, or let's say you've got your pattern. I keep saying project. Let's say you've got your pattern, you know how many stitches you need to cast on, you've cast on those stitches using the knitted cast on, and now you're ready to go. So whether you're practicing or you're ready to go, this is a great video that talks about the foundational stitch in knitting, the namesake stitch, the knit stitch. So Murphy's gonna keep napping and I'm gonna meet you at the coffee table and together we'll learn how to do it. Stitches on our needle. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to work back or knit your first row. So we learned that knit stitch, that basic or foundational stitch in our cast on, and we're going to use the same method to actually start knitting. So I've got 12 stitches on my needles here. They're in my left hand. My free needle is in my right hand. So just the same way that I made my stitches, I'm going to insert my right needle, my right hand needle, from the left side of the stitch. Make sure I get it cleanly through. Wrap the yarn around. Grab that yarn that I've just wrapped and pull it through. Now here's where it differs from the cast on. In the cast on, we took this stitch and put it back on the left hand needle. To knit, we're going to take this stitch off of the left hand needle. Maybe use your finger, let it work off the stitch there. Pull it nice and snug. And now we're going to leave it on the right hand needle. So this is your first knitted stitch. So keeping that on the right hand needle now, you insert through now the next stitch on your left hand needle. So take the right needle through the first stitch on the left hand from that left side of the stitch to the right. Wrap your working yarn around, grab it and pull it through, and then just work that stitch off and onto the right hand needle. So go from left to right, wrap the working yarn around, grab that working yarn and pull it through. And then you just slip it off the left hand needle, give it a little tug to make sure everything's nice and snug on your right hand needle. And we just keep going here. So rather than speed the video up, I'm just going to continue knitting through here so that you can watch what I'm doing and do it along with me. So you take your right needle through the left side of the stitch on the left needle, work your yarn around, grab it by articulating, oops, I got kind of gummed up there. So you're wrapping it around and then grabbing the yarn you've wrapped with your right hand needle and then pulling it off. So we'll go a little bit, try and get a little closer here. So you're going to take your right needle, put it through the stitch on the left hand needle. I showed you in the last video, but again, I like to let the yarn drape across my palm or my hand, grab it with my lower fingers, and let the yarn hang over my index finger so that I can articulate the yarn with my index finger. So insert from left to right, wrap the yarn around, and then grab that yarn you've wrapped and pull it through. Then you can slide the stitch off your left needle. Yeah, Murph. Keep it on the right needle and go to the next stitch. So I'm coming to the end here, stitch number 11, stitch number 12. All right, so we've knit our first row. You can see, oops. So we've got the cast on edge now is a little bit below our needle, and you've knit your first row of stitches. So now, what do? All of the stitches are on the needle in your right hand, and your left hand needle, well, what would be your left hand needle if I kept that position, is in your left hand. So what we do is switch. Just switch hands here. And you'll want to turn it around. So now this was the back of what we just did. Right, so now the back is facing the front. And now our right hand needle is the free needle to start knitting again. Big caveat here, big thing to watch out for here is now that your yarn tail from the start of your project is on the same side as your working yarn, the yarn that's attached to your skein. So when we start this next row, we want to kind of just bring that yarn tail away off to the side. And when we start to knit that next row, make sure we're working with the actual working yarn, the yarn that we want to knit with. You may need to kind of unwrap a little bit more from your ball at this point. But again, we just keep going and garter. And when you're working with the knit stitch, when you knit one way, one row, and then you turn the work and you knit back across, this is called garter stitch. So you'll see knit and garter used in some of the basic patterns. Garter stitch, it just means that you're using the knit stitch, that basic stitch, for everything. There are, as you move through your knitting, you may knit on one side and purl on the other. So it's just, there's different ways to work the different stitches you're creating. When you knit and then purl, we haven't gotten to purl yet, that's called stockinette. So if you see patterns that use stockinette versus garter stitch, you might want to just shy away from those until we get to that purl stitch. So this is the basic knit stitch that we're focused on, but knitting row 1 and row 2 will give you garter stitch. So that's another term that you can start to look out for as you're knitting. Okay. So we've just finished our first row. We've taken the needle with all of the stitches from the right hand, so we turned it and gave it to the left hand. And now we're going to knit back across. So just, again, working with the yarn in the right hand, wrap it around. So you just, to start the row, this might be a tough stitch for you depending on how loose or tight the stitch is. But you're going to just insert the needle from the left side, wrap that yarn around, catch that stitch, and then you're going to move it off of the left needle. So now you've created a new stitch, and that new stitch is resting on the right needle. So this is the beginning of row number 2. Insert the right hand needle, wrap the yarn around, and then you're going to catch that yarn that you've wrapped and pull it through. Now you can take it off your left hand needle because the stitch is complete. Insert the right hand needle, wrap the yarn around, catch that yarn you've wrapped and pull it through, and then you can take it off of the left hand needle. It's a nice step to practice is kind of just to pull on, gently tug your working yarn as you create these new stitches so that your stitches have a uniform or an even look and feel. Especially in the beginning, sometimes our stitches can have what we call different tension. Some can be looser, some can be tighter. But you might have more stitches than me. I've chosen just to cast on 12 so that I can get to the end and show you or familiarize you with what to do when you finish your row. So my last stitch, take it off the left hand needle. All of my stitches are on the right hand. And I'm just going to turn and take all the needle with all the stitches and put it in my left hand. My spare needle is in my right hand along with my working yarn. I'm just going to insert my needle, my right hand needle, wrap the yarn around, catch it and pull it through. So you'll start to become much more familiar. If your stitches are tight enough, you can kind of start to just let the tension hold that right hand needle. I tend to knit pretty close to the edge of my needles. I know some knitters prefer to instruct people not to do that, but knitting is all about how it feels. Whatever feels comfortable, and you can always learn new things as you progress and carry on, learning different things, adding skills. So I'm just going to keep knitting here, so knit along with me, but this is so that I can show you how you can start to get more comfortable and move more quickly, and also so that I can show you what a couple of rows looks like. So continue working here, making sure that I'm using the yarn that's attached to my ball of yarn or my skein. Just inserting the needle from left to right, wrapping the yarn, and then transferring the needle. Wrap my skein a little bit here. Another thing is sometimes we think that we've caught the yarn and brought it through, or sometimes we set our project down and come back and pick it up later and we forget where we are. Just a way to note which direction you should be working. Like, let's say I stopped here, my phone rang, something happened. I wanted a sip of coffee, and I put my work down and came back to it later. Even if my knitting got moved and I can't really remember how many stitches were on my right needle and how many were on my left, you can identify this by your yarn, the working yarn is attached to the new row. So that even if I kind of set this down like this and I pick it up, I see that my working yarn is here on this needle. So this is my right hand needle. I know it's just to flip that around. And now I'm ready to go again. So I insert my right needle, wrap my yarn around, pull it through. The first row is always kind of the hardest. So as you work and add additional rows, it will get a little bit easier, as well as more familiar, but it's a little bit easier when you have a bit of your knitting to kind of hold on to. In another video, I will show you some troubleshooting techniques. So how to identify if you've missed a stitch, what to do if you've dropped a stitch, those kinds of things. So this is generally what your project will start to look like. You can see that these new bumps are your new stitches, your new rows. So congratulations, guys, you are knitting. As always, guys, if you have any questions on knitting, anything I've showed you in this video, feel free to ask them in the questions below. As always, please give me a subscribe, and you'll get notifications as to when I've published the next video and the next skill. Thanks.